Virgo, I have to say, the moment I started looking into this reading, I could feel a very powerful energy building around you. It feels like something has been unfolding quietly for quite some time now. And what's interesting is, your intuition may have been picking up on this shift long before anything started showing up on the surface. Because I'm seeing someone here going through a very deep awakening. Someone who's looking back at the choices they've made. Looking back at everything that happened between the two of you. Looking back at a connection they once believed they fully understood. But wow, it feels like they're realizing they never really saw the whole picture. This person spent a long time trying to convince themselves they were okay. Trying to convince themselves they had moved on. Trying to convince themselves that this wasn't as important as it felt. But the more time passes, the harder it becomes to ignore what's happening inside of them. And honestly, I don't think what confuses them most is the feeling itself. I think what truly unsettles them is the realization that's beginning to emerge. They're starting to see the real value of someone they once assumed would always be there. You know, sometimes people don't fully understand what something means to them until they're forced to imagine life without it. And that's the feeling I'm picking up here. So what exactly caused their perspective to shift? What made them start seeing Virgo through completely different eyes? And why does this realization seem to be growing stronger right now? Okay, that's exactly what I'm seeing as I look deeper into this reading. Because the first thing that comes through for me here isn't regret, and it isn't loneliness either, it's realization. A realization that's arrived much later than they expected. Almost as if someone is waking up after spending a very long time living on autopilot. I see this person trying to fill their life with all kinds of things. Work, personal goals, daily responsibilities, conversations that never really touch the heart. They always found something to keep themselves busy, something to keep moving toward, something to prevent them from stopping long enough to face what was happening inside. But here's the thing, that empty space never truly disappeared. It was always there, quietly waiting for the moment when it could no longer be ignored. And when the Hermit card appears beside the Judgment card, I can't help but feel that this person has spent a lot of time alone with their thoughts, not necessarily isolated from the world, just alone in the ways that matter. Those quiet moments when nobody else is around, when the phone isn't ringing, when everything finally slows down enough for them to hear their own heart speaking. Because something keeps returning to them again and again, a memory, a conversation, a certain look, a certain feeling. And the more they try to push it away, the more vivid it becomes. The Six of Cups card makes me feel like these aren't passing thoughts. These are emotional memories. The kind that can unexpectedly surface in the middle of an ordinary day and suddenly change the entire mood of that day. The kind that stays with you, long after you thought it would. And I feel like this person has been reflecting on a lot lately, especially the way they once viewed Virgo. Because there was a time when they may have believed you would always be there, always understanding, always compassionate, always patient enough to wait. You know, sometimes people don't fully recognize the value of something until they start feeling like it may not always belong to them. And that's where the energy of the Five of Cups card starts showing up for me. Not as dramatic heartbreak, not as despair, nothing like that. It's much quieter, much deeper. More like a lingering sense of regret that follows them when nobody else is watching. A feeling they don't easily talk about. A feeling they may not even fully understand themselves. Because the more they look back, the more they realize there were things Virgo brought into their life that they never truly appreciated at the time. Peace, genuine sincerity. The feeling of being understood without having to explain every little part of themselves. And wow, that's a difficult realization to sit with, especially when it arrives long after the moment has passed. What stands out most to me is that this person is no longer looking at this connection the way they once did. Something has shifted, something important. A new perspective is beginning to form. A different truth is slowly coming into focus, and honestly, I don't think this is even close to everything they're about to discover, because there's something becoming very clear in this energy. This person is starting to stop blaming the circumstances, stop blaming the timing, stop blaming everything that happened around them, and honestly, I feel like they're entering a season of their life where looking honestly at themselves has become more important than ever before. That isn't easy. In fact, I think this may be the hardest part of all. Because when the Nine of Swords card comes through here, I get the feeling of sleepless nights, thoughts that keep circling, conversations happening inside their mind that nobody else knows about. There are moments when this person replays an old situation and wonders why they reacted the way they did, why they stayed silent, why they pulled away. why they allowed fear to make decisions that should have come from the heart. And what's interesting is, the answers they've been searching for don't seem to be outside of them anymore. They're finding them within themselves. When the Two of Swords card appears, it feels like this person once stood at a very important crossroads, not between two people, but between facing what they truly felt or continuing to pretend those feelings weren't there. They hesitated for a very long time, probably longer than they would ever admit, because some part of them knew that if they accepted the truth, everything would start to change. The way they saw themselves, the way they saw love, the way they saw Virgo. Some people are afraid of losing something. This person feels more afraid of how deep their feelings actually go. They're not used to feeling out of control. They're not used to someone occupying this much space in their thoughts. They're not used to carrying someone in their heart for this long. And the harder they tried to keep everything neatly contained, the more complicated everything became. The Seven of Swords card catches my attention here, because it doesn't feel like deception towards someone else. It feels like self-deception, like they've spent a very long time telling themselves stories that were easier to live with. Telling themselves it didn't matter, telling themselves they didn't miss you, telling themselves they didn't need this connection, telling themselves they had already moved on. But deep underneath all of that, there has always been a part of them that knew the truth, and that truth is becoming harder and harder to ignore. Wow, there's a powerful awakening happening here. Not loud, not dramatic, just a person slowly removing the layers of protection they've carried for a very long time. Things they once considered strengths. They're starting to question whether those things were actually walls. Things they once called logic are beginning to look a lot more like fear wearing a very convincing disguise. And when the Judgment card appears again in this reading, I can't help but feel like there's no going back to who they used to be. Something has been seen, something has been understood. A door inside their awareness is opened. And once that happens, it's incredibly difficult to pretend you never knew the truth. This person is standing at a very important threshold, because recognizing a mistake is only the beginning. The real question is, what are they going to do with everything they've just realized? That's the question that seems to be hanging over this entire energy, because I can't help but feel like something significant is shifting inside this person. Not because of a new feeling, not because something suddenly appeared out of nowhere, but because they're starting to see things more clearly. There were beliefs they once held on to so tightly, things they were convinced were true, things they used to justify the distance between the two of you. But the more they reflect, the harder those beliefs become to hold on to. When the Hanged Man card comes through here, it feels like someone standing in a completely different place than before. Same story, same person, same connection, but a completely different perspective. What once made them doubtful now makes them curious. What once made them pull away now makes them want to understand more deeply. And honestly, I think that's why this person has been observing so much lately. Not to judge, not to look for flaws, not to prove themselves right, but because they're genuinely trying to understand what makes Virgo so different. It feels like they once believed they understood you, but now they're realizing they only saw a small piece of the picture. They saw your strength, but they didn't see everything you had to overcome to become that strong. They saw your calmness, but they didn't see the emotional battles you fought quietly behind closed doors. They saw your maturity, but they didn't see the lessons that shaped the person you are today. Something is encouraging them to look beneath the surface now, to look deeper, and that's where the Tower card begins to show up for me. Not as some dramatic collapse, not as chaos, but more like a truth arriving unexpectedly and changing the way they see everything. Almost like the moment someone realizes the story they've been telling themselves for a very long time wasn't entirely true. Maybe they convinced themselves Virgo didn't care anymore. Maybe they convinced themselves Virgo had completely moved on. Maybe they convinced themselves this connection wasn't as meaningful as it felt. But the more they observe, the more they reflect, the harder it becomes to keep believing those things, because something very genuine is revealing itself to them. And what's interesting is, in the middle of all this change, I actually pick up on a very gentle energy, very soft, very warm. Almost like someone who's been living in confusion for a long time is finally beginning to find clarity. The Temperance card comes through here, and it feels like this person is no longer interested in living at extremes. They're tired of forcing themselves to deny what they feel, tired of constantly fighting what their heart is trying to tell them. They're beginning to sit with the truth instead, sit with the questions they've spent a long time avoiding, sit with emotions they once viewed as inconvenient. And it's within those quiet moments that I feel the Star card beginning to emerge. not as a promise, not as a guaranteed outcome, nothing like that. More like a small light appearing at the end of a very long journey. A feeling that maybe things were never exactly what they thought they were. Maybe they overlooked something important. Maybe they misunderstood someone. Maybe they allowed fear to lead the way for much longer than they should have. And the more they realize that, the stronger the desire becomes to understand what truly happened between the two of you. Because this isn't really about what they feel anymore. It's becoming something deeper than that. It's becoming a question of whether they're willing to face the whole truth, even the parts they've spent a long time avoiding. And wow, I think that's where the real awakening begins. Because when someone finally stops running from the truth, the first thing that usually appears isn't an answer. It's everything they've been carrying inside for far too long. And wow, I feel a lot of unspoken words in this energy. Sentences that never made it all the way out. Messages that were written and then deleted. Moments when they wanted to reach out, but chose silence instead. It feels like this person has lived with these unspoken feelings for so long that they've become part of their everyday life. Just something they've learned to carry. Something they've learned to live around. But that's starting to change. When the Page of Cups card appears here, the very first thing I notice is softness. A kind of softness they don't usually show people. This isn't someone who naturally reveals everything the moment they feel it. They like to think. They like to analyze. They like to be certain before they take action. But here's the thing. Some emotions can't be solved with logic. Some connections become even more confusing the harder you try to analyze them. Because the heart doesn't always follow the rules the mind creates. And I feel like this person is beginning to accept that. Maybe for the first time in a very long time. They're allowing themselves to feel instead of constantly evaluating. Allowing themselves to remember instead of forcing themselves to forget. Allowing themselves to admit that Virgo still holds a very special place in their thoughts. And honestly, there's a strong sense of urgency building here. Almost as if something inside them no longer wants to remain silent. Not because they hate silence, but because they're beginning to understand that silence never really protected anything. It only created more distance. When the Knight of Cups card comes through, I don't see someone trying to make grand promises. I don't see someone preparing a dramatic declaration. I see someone searching for a sincere way to approach the situation. Someone wondering, if they had spoken their truth sooner, would things have unfolded differently? If they had been honest from the beginning, would there have been fewer misunderstandings? If they could revisit certain moments from the past, would they choose differently this time? There are so many questions surrounding them. But what's interesting is, those questions are no longer centered around themselves. They're centered around Virgo, around Virgo's feelings, around the pain Virgo may have quietly carried during all that silence. And that's where the Queen of Cups card catches my attention. Because every time I look at this energy, I get the feeling that they're remembering a very particular version of you. Someone who tried to understand more than judge. Someone who could sense things that were never spoken aloud. Someone who gave them space to simply be themselves. And maybe that's exactly why this realization feels so heavy. Because when they look back now, they're starting to see all the things that should have been said. Thank you. I'm sorry. I care about you. Simple words, but somehow they remained unspoken. And I have to say, there's another energy beginning to build here. Everything feels like it's gaining momentum. Their thoughts are becoming clearer. Their emotions are becoming harder to ignore. Things they've tried to keep beneath the surface are slowly rising into view. The Eight of Wands card comes through, and it makes me feel like this period of delay can't continue forever. Because some conversations are meant to happen. Some truths are meant to be spoken. And this person feels very close to a moment where keeping everything inside simply won't feel possible anymore. So, the question I'm left with is this. When that door finally opens, what will be the very first thing they want Virgo to hear? Because I no longer feel the energy of someone desperately trying to hold on to everything the way they once did. Actually, it feels like they're learning how to let go. Not let go of this connection, but let go of the things that have prevented them from seeing it clearly. Old versions of themselves are beginning to feel unfamiliar. Old reactions, old defense mechanisms, old beliefs, things that once made them feel safe. And what's interesting is, the more they grow through this journey, the more they realize that not everything familiar is actually meant to stay. When the Eight of Cups card appears here, it feels like someone standing in front of a road they already know they need to walk. Nobody is forcing them. Nobody is giving them an ultimatum. But deep down, they understand that certain things have already completed their purpose in their life. Patterns they've carried for years, fears that slowly became habits, choices made from self-protection rather than from the heart. And they don't want to carry those things with them anymore. I also sense a shift in the way they define success, the way they define happiness, the way they define what truly matters. There were things that once sat at the very top of their priority list, things they worked hard to achieve, things they thought would finally make them feel complete. But somehow, those things don't seem to fill the space they once expected them to. It's almost like they've achieved some of the things they always wanted. Yet standing in the middle of those accomplishments, they still feel like something is missing. Something that can't be replaced by achievement, can't be replaced by staying busy, can't be replaced by constantly moving forward. And wow, that realization is changing more than they expected. The Four of Pentacles card immediately draws my attention to everything they've been holding on to too tightly. Not just people, but ideas, expectations, fears, the need to stay in control. This person once believed that if they could keep everything within reach, nothing would ever hurt them. But they're beginning to realize that sometimes holding on too tightly is exactly what prevents us from experiencing the most meaningful things. Some things need to be trusted. Some connections need to be felt. Some journeys can't be controlled every step of the way. And honestly, I think that's one of the biggest lessons they're learning right now. That brings me to the Death card. And every time this card comes through in a reading like this, I don't see chaos. I don't see destruction. I see a door quietly closing, not dramatically, not suddenly, just a necessary ending. A part of who they used to be is slowly falling away. A way of seeing life that no longer fits. A version of themselves that doesn't belong in the future they're growing toward. They don't want to be the person who keeps avoiding their emotions. They don't want to keep creating distance between themselves and the things that genuinely matter. They don't want to keep living according to truths they no longer believe in. There's so much maturity in this energy, so much honesty, and I think that's exactly what's opening the door to a new chapter. When the World card appears, it feels like someone standing at the end of a very long journey. Not because everything is finished, but because they finally understand what the journey was trying to teach them all along. Some lessons take years to truly sink in. Some truths have to circle back again and again before we're finally ready to see them. This person is beginning to understand why things unfolded the way they did, and the more they understand, the stronger their desire becomes to live in alignment with who they truly are. Because once an old chapter genuinely comes to a close, a different question begins to emerge. A much more important question. Who is this person becoming through all of these changes? And when they fully step into that version of themselves, what kind of future will they choose to create? I think this is the moment when things begin to feel a little clearer. Not because they suddenly have all the answers, not because every question has been resolved, but because they're finally realizing they don't want to keep living the way they used to. There have been battles inside of them for a very long time. Moments when they tried to rationalize their feelings. Moments when they convinced themselves that time would eventually make everything disappear. Moments when they searched for another path, simply to avoid facing what their heart truly wanted. But that energy is losing its grip. And honestly, I don't feel this person wants to keep fighting themselves anymore. They don't want to spend so much energy running. They don't want to keep questioning whether they should feel what they feel. Because deep down, they've known the answer for a long time. They just weren't ready to accept it. What stands out most to me here is the seriousness of it all. And wow, that's very different from the energy I picked up earlier in this story. There's a sense that they're beginning to think about the future in a much more mature way. A more grounded way. A more realistic way. When the Ace of Pentacles card appears here, it feels like this person is no longer interested in living inside endless possibilities and unanswered questions. They want something that can actually be built, something that can be nurtured, something that can exist in the real world. Because the older they become, the more they understand that feelings matter, a lot. But feelings alone aren't enough. A connection that lasts requires more than emotion. It requires presence, choice, consistency, real action. And I think they're finally starting to understand that. What's interesting is, I don't see them looking toward the future with fear anymore. I see consideration, thoughtfulness. There is still caution, but it doesn't feel like avoidance. There is still hesitation, but it doesn't feel like a closed door. Every time the Lovers card comes through in this reading, I get the feeling of someone who is finally stopping the battle between their heart and their decisions. They're learning how to listen to both, logic and emotion, reality and hope, what they know and what they feel. And somewhere within that process, a very important decision is beginning to take shape. Not a decision made from impulse, not a decision born from loneliness, but one shaped by reflection, growth, experience. Lessons that took time to learn. I can also feel movement building in this energy. Like something has finally started turning. Like someone who spent a long time standing still is beginning to understand where they want to go. When the Chariot card appears, it doesn't feel like they're standing at a crossroads anymore. It feels like they've spent enough time observing, enough time thinking, enough time trying to understand what truly matters. And once clarity begins to arrive, people tend to move forward, maybe slowly, maybe one step at a time, maybe not as quickly as they wish, but they move. And perhaps the part that touches me most is the energy of the Ten of Pentacles card. Because when I look at this card within this story, I don't see perfection. I don't see a fairy tale. I see someone beginning to understand the value of something lasting, something worth protecting, something worth investing in, a connection that reaches beyond temporary emotions and touches a vision of the future itself. And honestly, that may be the biggest change of all. They no longer see Virgo as a brief chapter in their life. They no longer see this connection as something that will simply fade into the background with time. Something deeper is forming here, something much more meaningful, something that makes them stop and ask themselves, if I truly want to create a different future than the one I've known before, what is the very first step I'm willing to take? And honestly, I think that may be the biggest message this reading leaves behind. Not a message about what happens next. Not a message about who will do what, but a message about a transformation taking place within a person. Someone who spent a very long time trying to understand their own heart is moving through a profound period of awakening. And the more they reflect on everything that's happened, the more they begin to recognize the value Virgo brought into their life. This change isn't coming from a temporary emotion. It's not coming from impulse. It's coming from deeper realizations that were shaped through a long journey of reflection, growth, and learning to see things from a completely different perspective. Because some truths take time to reveal themselves. Some feelings take time before we're finally able to call them by their real name. And sometimes, the thing that changes our lives isn't a dramatic moment at all. It's the moment we become honest with ourselves, truly honest, about what we feel, about what matters, about the things we've been trying not to see. So if this story resonated with you in any way, take what feels right for your own journey, and gently leave the rest behind. Thank you, Virgo, for spending this time here with me today. You truly mean a lot to me. And I genuinely appreciate every single one of you who chooses to sit down, listen, and share this energy with me. It means more than you probably realize. I'll see you again in the next reading. Until then, please be gentle with yourself. Take good care of your heart. Take good care of your spirit. And remember to keep moving forward in your own way, at your own pace. Okay, Virgo, bye for now. And I'll see you again very soon.